Part 33. Then he pulled me back at arm's length. I think we might want to have that pack chat with Jonathan soon and help answer some of the questions I see in his eyes. I turned and looked at Jonathan, who looked a bit uncomfortable. "Will you be nice?" I whispered up at Phil, and he laughed. Like I said, we like him. This is also his chance to ask us questions, to help him understand your wolf and pack side. Those are more important things for him to know, and he should know them before. I nodded, and Phil let go of me. I turned to Jonathan, who was smiling again. "Thank you for doing this," I said. "Doing what?" he asked, looking confused. "For caring enough to go through the wolf parts, too." This time he took my hands. "Reina, it is who you are. I knew that before. I'm grateful that they're willing to talk to me and help me understand that more. The more I know, the better mate I can be for you." I smiled wide and he winked. I gave him a quick kiss and then turned. I hugged Jackson and Rock and then turned to Track, who was still a little quiet. "I am sorry," I whispered when I hugged him. "I shouldn't have asked you not to tell." He grinned at me. "I would do anything for you, Ray. You know that," he whispered into my ear, hugged me back, and then turned me around. "Now, be a good little pup and go play so us guys can have our chat." I stuck my tongue out at him and then walked out of the room. I heard Trent talking quietly, but I was on a mission. I needed to find Aunt Mary. When I did find her, she was sitting with Aunt Sarah in a small sitting room. They both smiled at me, and I spilled it faster than I thought I could talk. When I was done, I looked at them both, the terror evident on my face. "What am I going to do?" Aunt Sarah laughed. "You are going to be the perfect hostess, that's what." "I mean no disrespect, Aunt Sarah, but excuse me?" Jonathan's aunt nodded. "Absolutely. You will smile, greet, chit-chat, and show them all just what a Beldrin and soon-to-be Hilver is made of." I blinked, staring at them both. This is so not what I expected. "We will chat with Alyssa," Aunt Mary said. "Casually make some comments, drop hints, and make sure you have a lovely time." I frowned, looking down at my lap. I don't have many friends. 2, actually. Well, 3 if you count Paige, my physical therapist, and I do count her as a friend. "What about your pack?" Aunt Mary gasped. Aunt Sarah showed her knowledge of wolves, which surprised me. "Female werewolves are scarce, Mary. Maybe a 10-to-1 ratio in the best situation. If Reina's clique is as large as you say, I would say there would be only maybe 1 or 2 females in her age." I nodded. "Missy and Teresa. Well, she isn't exactly in the clique. She's in the Moon clique. They're impulsive too, but, well, there are 2 cliques my age. So Missy is the only one in my direct clique. Though, I guess I would have to invite Teresa as well. Even though she and Phil are not mates, but..." I sighed. She doesn't like me very much. Aunt Sarah smiled at me. "Honey, this is your party. No matter how much Alyssa will try to steal the show, it's about you. So you invite your 2 friends, 3 friends, and that's that." Man, that sounded pathetic. If I could really try, I could invite the vampires that I met through Jonathan, but I barely knew them. Great. 3 female friends. What did that say about me? If Jonathan's friends threw him a party, they would need a ballroom to fill it. For me, a large closet would work. Aunt Mary patted my hand. "Don't you worry, dear. Aunt Sarah and I will take care of it." I thanked them quickly, then stood and walked out, my arms at my side and my head down. I looked like I was walking into a sunroom instead of a party. That morning, I changed into my PJs and crawled into bed, still wondering how I was going to survive this. Why was I more worried about this little party than I was the huge coupling party? Because Alyssa is putting this one together, I mumbled, as I pulled Wolfie out and flopped back on my pillows. There was a knock on the door and I called out. Jonathan walked in and I smiled, then realized I hadn't seen him since I left him with the guys, and that was several hours ago. He walked over and took his usual seat on the side of my bed. "Have you been with the guys all this time?" I asked in awe. He shook his head. "No, but we did talk for about 3 hours straight," he smiled. "What did you talk about for that long?" I asked, sitting up. Jonathan winked. "Can't tell you that." I rolled my eyes but smiled. "They didn't give you a pack tattoo, did they?" "No," he laughed. 3 hours? Really?" He nodded. "Then I had to go talk to Trent. I think we could trust him. Then I had some business to tend to, party and otherwise. Then Alyssa caught me in the hallway and got Missy and Allison's information out of me. Paige was a given," he shrugged. "Pathetic, isn't it?" I sighed, looking down at Wolfie in my arms. "What is?" 3 friends. Only 3 female friends to invite. Why bother?" "Hey now, it's not the number that matters. Those 3 friends are important to you." I shrugged and laid back down. "Yeah, they are. But 3?" He laughed. "And if you had 20, do you think each one would be as special?" I plucked Wolfie's ears up and shrugged again. "Let's talk about something else, please," I whined. He nodded and leaned forward, kissing me. "I missed you." I giggled and smiled at him. Then my eyes widened and I sat up. So fast, in fact, that if it weren't for Jonathan's vampire reflexes, I would have smacked him in the nose with my forehead. "Oh, no!" I gasped. "What's wrong?" "Allison," I said, looking at him. "Allison is coming." "Yes," he stated slowly. "Well, when she and Joel had their coupling party, I didn't get them a gift." I looked around the room, then spotted my laptop. I could order them something and have it overnighted. I went to throw the covers back, but Jonathan took my shoulders and smiled. "You did get them a present. Well, we did. I hope you don't mind. I made it from the both of us." I blinked hard and looked at him. He shrugged. "We weren't even a couple at the time, so I had no right, but—" "What did we get them?" He smiled. "Matching leather jackets." "Really? Wow," I stated, then looked at him again. "You did that?" He shrugged. "Like I said, you were a little busy." I chuckled, and he looked at me. "You aren't mad that I did that before I even asked you to be my girl?" I smiled. It was sweet, and no, I'm not mad. Although you would have been in an odd situation right now if I had said no. His brows rose and I winked. He shook his head. "Well then, another reason I'm glad you said yes." We both laughed then. Jonathan sat with me until I fell asleep, which didn't take long. The next day went too fast. Alyssa found me while I was working out in the hot tub, Paige leaning over the edge chatting with me. Alyssa informed me that the party was going to be the next evening. "Only 2 days before the big party," she explained, as if I didn't know that. "I hope you don't mind, but I invited 2 of my friends," she smiled when my eyes widened. "I asked your father, and he said it's okay." I shrugged, trying to remember what Aunt Sarah told me earlier in her room. "Sure, that's great." Alyssa nodded and looked at Paige. "It's not formal, so wear whatever is comfortable." Then she turned and nearly skipped off. When she was too far for her vampire ears to hear, I looked at Paige. I am so glad you're coming. Paige laughed. I'm glad I was invited. Of course you are, I huffed. You're like a sister to me. She smiled, and then I panicked. I told her about Alyssa's comment about the keychain, and Paige looked ready to spit nails. I thought my drawer looked like somebody went through it, she nearly hissed. I can't believe she would do something that low. I can, I stated, leaning back against the side of the hot tub. Track stopped by, but only for a few minutes. In part, he wanted to make sure I wasn't mad at him for slipping with Phil. After I was finally able to convince him I wasn't mad, he told me that Missy had accepted the invitation. Do you think I should have asked Teresa? No, he chuckled. She's not your friend. Alyssa has invited two of her friends, I frowned, and Track looked at me. Don't worry, I huffed. I'll be a good little wolf and not eat anyone. He laughed and then gave me a serious look. 3 more days, he stated, and I nodded. Then you will officially be off the market. I rolled my eyes and he looked down at his hands. Any second thoughts? I thought you liked Jonathan, I asked. He shrugged. I do, but you didn't answer the question. I rolled my eyes. No second thoughts. He nodded and then hugged me and told me he had to run. Mom is frantic trying to get everything ready for us to wear. She's a little edgy. I smiled and he kissed me on the cheek and then left. I found my dad later that night. It was 2 a.m. and I was wandering around trying to avoid Alyssa. He was coming out of one of his studies and he smiled at me. I was beginning to wonder where you were. I flew into his arms and wrapped my arms around him and held him as tightly as I could. I felt his arms around me and the tears started. What's wrong? He stated, but I shook my head and buried it in his chest. He managed to walk us back to the study and set us on the couch. As I cried, I told him all about Alyssa and how awful she was. I told him how my wolf had gotten out of hand and how I wanted to fight her. But he didn't have a chance to react. I moved straight into the gift and the comment she made about it. Then I jumped to the party. From there, I went to the trying not to be clingy but didn't want Jonathan to have to leave after the party. And from there, I went on about how I kept expecting Jonathan to realize he had made a big mistake and run out as fast as he could. When I finally came up for air, his shirt was soaked and my eyes were puffy. He lifted my chin and wiped my cheek, smiling at me softly. Alyssa is jealous of you and all that you have, he stated. I went to open my mouth, but he shook his head, taking my hands. Not just the material things. She's jealous of your friends you have, real friends that care about you and would do anything for you. I frowned and he nodded. Do you have any idea how rare that is? He chuckled when I shrugged. I'm glad you don't. Pack or not, you have friends that have done and would do things for you that most people wouldn't. She saw that the moment she came here. As for your gift, Jonathan will love it. It came from your heart, and that's what it's supposed to be about. Alyssa wanted to try to hurt you and make you think it was a stupid gift. If she really thought it was so awful, she wouldn't have said anything. She would have just let you give it to him and be embarrassed. I tilted my head and he chuckled. As for Jonathan, sweetheart, that boy loves you very, very much. I shook my head. But why, Daddy? Look at him. Look at him. Look at his life. Why would he want me? I'm not special. I'm very sheltered, very mixed up girls with issues a mile long. He chuckled. That's only your perception, Reina. When Jonathan first saw you during one of his visits, he was intrigued. I actually discouraged him, rather abruptly. When I stared at my dad, he shrugged. It has worked on the others. The others? I frowned. Sweetheart, Do you really think Jonathan is the first boy that has wanted to date you? When I bit my lower lip, he threw back his head and laughed. Why that was so funny, I had no idea. Reina, I have scared away over a dozen wannabe suitors. When I eyed him hard, he shrugged. I'm not ashamed of it. And a few were harder to scare off than the others. One was actually extremely persistent. I tilted my head and he smiled. But Jonathan, he was different. When I told him he couldn't date you, he asked why. I must admit that threw me. He didn't argue or rage or swear to do whatever it took to get you. I looked at my dad hard. Him saying that implied that those things had been done by the others. Who had come to my dad and asked to date me? He simply listened to me tell him why he couldn't. It was a few months before he came to me again. This time he told me all that he had learned about you. Not just facts, but how he noticed that you liked werewolf and vampire movies, how you liked to watch me while I worked in my study at times. He told me that he saw you help the maids with chores sometimes. He spied on me? I gasped, and my dad laughed. No, Reina. He noticed you. He really noticed you and saw things that none of the others even thought about. He told me how you were quiet, but that you had a strength in you. He knew you were part werewolf, and he told me that he wanted to get to know more about you. So I let him. I told him he still couldn't date you, but that he could visit here with me, and we could get to know each other a little more. Great. So I was a challenge to him. You really aren't listening, are you? You meant so much to him that he was willing to do all that, go through all that I put him through, which is saying something, to be with you. What did you put him through? Never you mind, but trust me. He had plenty of chances and reasons to run, though those had nothing to do with you. He brushed the hair out of my face and smiled, the way only a father could. I have no doubt in my mind that he loves you. I smiled. Thank you, Daddy. Then I hugged him again. When I finally went to bed, I was exhausted from the crying, but I felt better and was smiling. Jonathan crept in, and I looked at him. Why are you being quiet? He put a finger to his lips and came towards the bed. Aunt Mary found out I've been in here while you sleep, he whispered. She went a little mad, talking about your reputation and how it's absolutely not appropriate. Then she told me if she finds out I'm in here while you're asleep, she's going to set up a cot in her room and make me sleep there. My eyes widened and he nodded, no sarcasm on his face. Would she really do that? I whispered back, glancing at the door. He gave me the "what do you think" look, and I gasped. I'm willing to take the risk. I don't want you to have sleep without me. I smiled and kissed him. If she catches you, you can't be so chivalrous from her room. He shrugged. I'll sneak out. Wow, did I just say that? What is it about her that makes me feel like a small child? We both chuckled, and then I put a finger to his lips. No, we'll play by her rules for the next few days. He nodded, looking sad. I reached under my pillow and pulled Wolfie out. I looked down at him. You could take Wolfie with you, I said, half joking. Wow, you would do that for me? He asked seriously. I nodded. Yeah, but I wouldn't do that for just anyone, you know. Oh, I know, but I want him here with you. That way, I know you have someone. I smiled, and part of me was relieved. I looked around the room. What about something else? Like what? He smiled at me. I don't know. What about one of your pillows? He asked quietly. My pillows? He nodded, looking a little timid, which was something I hadn't seen him do before. It would smell like you, he explained quietly, and I smiled and pulled one out. Then, as corny as it sounds, I kissed it before I handed it to him. He smiled wide and then leaned forward and kissed me. Chapter 21. The next evening I woke up at 5 p.m. and stretched. I glanced at my pile of pillows and smiled. I got out of bed and was gathering my clothes when there was a knock on my door. "Who is it?" I called out, since I was still in my PJs. "It's Allison," came an excited voice. I smiled and hurried to the door. When I opened it, she rushed in and hugged me. I laughed and she pulled away. "Oh, I woke you." "What?" "No, I was just getting ready to hop in the shower." She smiled. "I am so glad you invited me to your party, Reina. I have missed you." She hugged me again, and I laughed, realizing I had missed her too. Allison was dressed in a plaid skirt with a buckle and a red sweater. Yes, it was cashmere. Her 5'5" frame made me feel a bit bulky, but her smile made me forget it quickly enough. "Where's Joel?" I asked, looking back at the closed door. "With Jonathan," she grinned, then looked at the clothes in my hand. "Oh, don't let me keep you. Hurry and get ready so we can talk and catch up." Okay," I stated, wishing I had woken up earlier. "Where will you be?" "Right here," she smiled, then leaned forward. "I don't mind waiting here, honestly." I frowned a bit. "Alyssa?" "Oh, Reina, I know she's your cousin, and I'm sure she must be nice." "She's not nice, not in the least," I huffed, and Allison rolled her eyes. "I am so glad you said that. I was worried that you liked her. Frankly, she freaks me out." When I chuckled, she nodded. "It's like she plays all nice, but she's just doing it while she sets her trap." I gave her a quick rundown of what had happened, sitting on a bench while she sat on a chair. I still had my clothes on my lap, but it felt too good to talk to her. Allison may be a tea-top, sort of, but she was nice and genuine. She gasped and glared in all the right places, and even clenched her fists a few times. It was an odd look for her, but she was being supportive. "She invited 2 of her friends to the party, too," I sighed, and Allison frowned. "Why?" I shrugged, picking at my shirt hem that was still over my lap. "To show me up, I guess." "That's just mean and nasty and mean," she huffed, and I grinned. I promised I wouldn't eat her, so I guess I have to play nice. Allison's smile returned. Well, I didn't make any such promise. She winked at me, and then we both turned when someone else knocked on the door. I looked down at myself, and Allison jumped up and walked to the door. She was careful to barely open the door and poked her head out. "It's Jonathan and Joel," she said, turning around and blocking the view. I groaned, and she turned back to the door. I heard her giggle and finally closed the door. "Jonathan was a bit persistent, but I told him he had to wait till you took your shower." I was still smiling when I hurried into the bathroom. When I walked back out, Joel and Jonathan were there. Allison was standing with them, and they all turned and smiled at me. Allison dragged Joel over and waited. I shrugged and hugged him, which seemed to be what she was waiting for, because her smile got wider. Jonathan looked at me, and I grinned. His eyes looked a bit sad, and I frowned. "Is something wrong?" I asked, a trickle of worry rising up. He shook his head, walked over to stand in front of me, and touched my cheek. "Not now, but I didn't enjoy last night at all," he whispered. "I think I hit the boyfriend jackpot." I looked up at him and nodded. "I didn't sleep well either. Did you bring back my pillow?" "No," he chuckled. "I'm going to keep it if you don't mind." "The scent will wear off eventually," I teased. He narrowed his brows playfully. "You're right. I have to bring it back when that happens and switch it for another one." Allison giggled, and we both turned. She had her arm through Joel's, and he was smiling too. "You look so adorable together," Allison exclaimed. And Jonathan looked at Joel. "I look adorable?" Joel laughed. I wouldn't say adorable. A little cute, maybe fluffy, but adorable might be stretching it. We all laughed then, and Jonathan turned back to me. So what should we do while we wait for Missy to arrive? Once the party starts, Joel will have to keep me sane for a while. He kissed my cheek, and then there was another knock on the door. Please let it be Missy, I whined, as Jonathan walked over to it. I sighed in relief when Missy stepped timidly into the room. I walked over, took her hand, and then introduced her to Allison and Joel. They were smiling and sincere when they said hello, and I saw Missy relax a little. Then Missy looked at me. Reina, Track said to give you a message. I nodded, waiting. She looked at the others, then shrugged at me. He said to tell you not to pig out at the party, she shrugged, again to show she didn't understand. I rolled my eyes, and Jonathan looked at me. This time I shrugged. I promised Track I wouldn't eat anyone. Everyone laughed, but with me, not at me, and that felt good. Jonathan's phone rang, and he pulled it out of his pocket. He looked at me. Did you lose your phone again? Huh? He answered his phone and nodded. Yes, she made it, he stated, and I looked at Missy, who did blush. I smiled at her to show I understood overprotective wolves. Jonathan handed me the phone. Here, you take this. When I did, he looked at Allison. Would you mind calling Reina's phone so I can find it? I shook my head and put the phone to my ear. Hello? Hey, wolf girl, Track's voice replied. I called to make sure Missy made it to you, since I couldn't come in. Mom has me and the guys running around like loons on pre-party errands. Sorry, I moaned. Yeah, you owe me, he chuckled. And then I heard Rock and Jackson correct him that I owed them all. I laughed. Cookies? Oh, this is bigger than cookies. Pies? What kind? Apple? There was more conversation between them, and then Track replied, 1 pie for each of us ought to help ease the suffering. I chuckled. I'll see what I can do. You and Missy stay out of trouble, Ray, he added in a more serious tone. Yes, I moaned. I mean it. You're both too important to us. Missy had to go through a lot to be allowed without wolves with her. Plus, she will follow you into any trouble. Great. Now I was responsible for her? No pressure, right? I got it, I huffed, and Missy mouthed, I'm sorry. I winked at her, then switched ears. Gotta go now. I think the male strippers are here now. What the... was all he got out, and I hung up the phone. Missy and I laughed, and Allison giggled. Jonathan walked over with my phone and reached behind me, sliding it slowly into my back pocket. Keep this on you, will you? Your hand or my phone? I whispered, and he grinned at me. Jonathan's phone rang again, and he looked down at it. He shot me another look and then pressed the button. Hello? He listened for a few minutes and then shook his head at me. She was just giving you a hard time, I am sure. His brows rose at me, and I could see the smallest hint of worry. There were some vampires that enjoyed the human traditions of wild parties before a union. Some ended the union before it even happened. I blinked innocently, and then Jonathan pushed the button and shoved his phone back in his pocket. I can't believe he thought I was serious, I huffed. You weren't, were you? Jonathan asked, smiling. Joel shook his head. Maybe we better check this party thing out first to make sure you females will be safe. He winked at Jonathan, and Allison swatted his arm playfully. Another knock, and this time I moaned. Allison and Missy were here, so that left the odds tilted. Jonathan opened the door and then growled a bit when it was pushed the rest of the way, and Alyssa strutted in with 2 other females behind her. Oh, they are here, she exclaimed, her eyes as wide as her fake smile. My hackles rose just a bit, and Missy fell into step just behind my right shoulder. Jonathan quickly moved to my other side, reaching down and taking my hand. "Allison!" Alyssa cried out, and she grabbed her and hugged her tightly. Allison's eyes widened, and she looked at me over her shoulder. I flinched. Then she turned to Joel. "And that means you are no other than Joel. Oh, what an adorable couple you are." Jonathan chuckled, and Joel shot him a look. "I think the term is fluffy," Jonathan mumbled, and Alyssa turned. What was that?" "Nothing," he chuckled, and she shrugged. "Well then, these are two of my dearest friends," she said, gesturing to the two who were standing and watching us. She moved next to one of them. "This is Margaret, but we call her Mar." She giggled, and Mar gave a nod and said hello. She was just about an inch shorter than me, with long, straight auburn hair and brown eyes. She seemed a little overwhelmed and was quiet after her greeting. "And this is Nicole, who we call—" "Well, Nicole," Alyssa laughed, as if it were somehow very funny. Nicole was closer to Alyssa's 5'5", just a tad taller. She had very shiny black hair that was cut in a short bob, that was even shorter in the back. She had dark eyes, and they seemed to burn with the same flame I saw in Alyssa's. Great. 2 demons and a demon follower. I started wondering if I actually did use the term promise when I told Track I wouldn't eat anyone. Alyssa turned, standing in front of her friends as if she were on a stage and they were her backup singers. "Well then, let the party begin." She clapped then, and I cleared my throat. We're still waiting for Paige?" Alyssa's smile dipped a bit. "Oh yes, Paige." She looked around. "Well, I'm sure she is around. Why don't we send the boys to find her for us?" She smiled at Jonathan. He squeezed my hand. "Where's this party going to be?" "In the second floor sitting room," Alyssa explained, and then turned. "Come along, girls. We have so much fun planned." My eyes widened, and I turned to Jonathan. "Please don't make me go," I whispered. He smiled. "If I could get you out of it, I would. Trust me. Text me if it gets too bad, and Joel and I will set something on fire." Joel nodded, and Allison shrugged. "Well..." She, Missy, and I stood looking at the door. Alyssa and her groupies were in the hall before she realized we hadn't followed her. She frowned a bit, and I turned and kissed Jonathan. "If I don't survive, I love you." He laughed and shook his head. "Just a few hours." Allison kissed Joel, then the 3 of us joined hands and marched out of the room. "Why do they look like they're going to a hanging instead of a party?" Joel sighed. "Because they basically are," Jonathan frowned. "Should we wait a few minutes and then rescue him?" Jonathan shook his head. "I have to let Reina handle this, but if it gets too bad, we might need your pyro skills." "Just tell me what I can light up." Paige met us in the hall. She was wearing a pretty white dress, and her hair was done up a bit. I smiled and glanced back at Michael, who was looking at Paige. Alyssa introduced her and then herded us all to the sitting room. I moaned quietly when we walked in. It was done up in pink and silver. I was so not a pink girl. There were balloons, streamers, and bouquets of pink and white flowers. It was tasteful, just so not me. Allison, Missy, and Paige looked around and then looked at me, the same reaction on their faces. "Well," Alyssa beamed, "what do you think?" I tried to smile. It's nice." She grinned as if I had just heaped praise on her, then turned to Paige. "I hope you brought your camera." Paige lifted it, and Alyssa nodded. I turned and looked at Michael and mouthed, "Help me." He looked around the room, his brows narrowed, and then Alyssa pushed him out. "No males in here. This is a female-only party, she chuckled, and then closed the door. Now, I have some games ready. She insisted that Paige take way too many pictures, and I wondered how many her memory card would even hold. We suffered through a game she called Picture It. She stood at a big whiteboard and then started to draw a picture. The first person to get it right won. One of the things she drew was Jonathan. Missy got that one right, and Alyssa turned and looked at her friend. He's so hot, isn't he? Nicole chuckled and nodded, but Margaret simply nodded, shooting me a small smile. Another one was Rock. Now why would she do that? Her friends had never met him. I got that one, and then Nicole smiled. So, when do we get to meet these guys? She looked ready to lick her lips. Alyssa laughed. Soon. They're always here at the manor. They're probably staying away because I said that this is for us females only. But I bet they won't be able to stay away for long, she winked, and Nicole grinned. I shivered. We did this for over an hour. Missy and I exchanged several glances, and finally, when we didn't think we could take it anymore, Alyssa announced that I was the winner. She strutted over to a table and picked up a pink gift bag with soft, fuzzy pink handles. She pushed it towards me. Open it, she squealed, and I took it as if it might bite me. I sat it on the floor in front of me and reached in, pulling out a shirt. When I held it up, my brows went up. It was actually pretty. It was soft, probably silk, and deep red. The neckline was too low for me, but other than that, it was nice. Wow, Alyssa, this is nice. Thank you, I stated, still a little shocked. She winked at me. Only the best for my cousin. Then she turned. Now, how about a treasure hunt? And I'm going to stop there.